Coming of Age in Mississippi by Moody. Narrated by Reneé Pitts. Copyright 1968 by Moody. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Doubleday, an imprint of the Knopf Doubleday Publishing Group, a division of Random House Incorporated, and was produced in the year 2012 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Part 1. Childhood. Chapter 1. I'm still haunted by dreams of the time we lived on Mr. Carter's plantation. Lots of Negroes lived on his place. Like Mama and Daddy, they were all farmers. We all lived in rotten wood 2-room shacks, but ours stood out from the others because it was up on the hill with Mr. Carter's big white house, overlooking the farms and the other shacks below. It looked just like the Carter's barn with a chimney and a porch, but Mama and Daddy did what they could to make it livable. Since we had only one big room and a kitchen, we all slept in the same room. It was like 3 rooms in one. Mama them slept in one corner, and I had my little bed in another corner next to one of the big wooden windows. Around the fireplace, a rocking chair and a couple of straight chairs formed a sitting area. This big room had a plain, dull-colored wallpaper tacked loosely to the walls with large thumbtacks. Under each tack was a piece of cardboard which had been taken from shoeboxes and cut into little squares to hold the paper and keep the tacks from tearing through. Because there were not enough tacks, the paper bulged in places. The kitchen didn't have any wallpaper, and the only furniture in it was a wood stove, an old table, and a safe. Mama and Daddy had 2 girls. I was almost 4, and Adeline was a crying baby about 6 or 7 months. We rarely saw Mama and Daddy because they were in the field every day except Sunday. They would get up early in the morning and leave the house just before daylight. It was 6 o'clock in the evening when they returned, just before dark. George Lee, Mama's 8-year-old brother, kept us during the day. He loved to roam the woods, and taking care of us prevented him from enjoying his favorite pastime. He had to be at the house before Mama and Daddy left for the field, so he was still groggy when he got there. As soon as Mama them left the house, he would sit up in the rocking chair and fall asleep. Because of the solid wooden door and windows, it was dark in the house even though it was nearing daybreak. After sleeping for a couple of hours, George Lee would jump up suddenly, as if he was awakened from a nightmare, run to the front door, and sling it open. If the sun was shining and it was a beautiful day, he would get all excited and start slinging open all the big wooden windows, making them rock on their hinges. Whenever he started banging the windows and looking out at the woods longingly, I got scared. Once, he took us to the woods and left us sitting in the grass while he chased birds. That night, Mama discovered we were full of ticks, so he was forbidden to take us there any more. Now, every time he got the itch to be in the woods, he'd beat me. One day, he said, "I'm going hunting." I could tell he meant to go by himself. I was scared he was going to leave us alone, but I didn't say anything. I never said anything to him when he was in that mood. "You heard me?" he said, shaking me. I still didn't say anything. Whap! He hit me hard against the head. I started to boo-hoo as usual, and Adeline began to cry too. "Shut up," he said, running over to the bed and slapping a bottle of sweetening water into her mouth. "You stay here, right here," he said, forcing me into a chair at the foot of the bed. "And watch her," pointing to Adeline in the bed. "And you better not move." Then he left the house. A few minutes later, he came running back into the house like he forgot something. He ran over to Adeline in the bed and snatched the bottle of sweetening water from her mouth. He knew I was so afraid of him, I might have sat in the chair and watched Adeline choke to death on the bottle. Again, he beat me up. Then he carried us on the porch. I was still crying, so he slapped me, knocking me clean off the porch. As I fell, I hit my head on the side of the steps, and blood came gushing out. He got some scared and cleaned away all traces of the blood. He even tried to push down the big knot that had popped up on my forehead. That evening, we sat on the porch waiting, as we did every evening, for Mama them to come up the hill. The electric lights were coming on in Mr. Carter's big white house as all the Negro shacks down in the bottom began to fade with the darkness. Once it was completely dark, the lights in Mr. Carter's house looked even brighter, like a big lighted castle. It seemed like the only house on the whole plantation. Most evenings, after the Negroes had come from the fields, washed and eaten, they would sit on their porches, look up toward Mr. Carter's house, and talk. Sometimes as we sat on our porch, Mama told me stories about what was going on in that big white house. She would point out all the brightly lit rooms, saying that old Lady Carter was baking tea cakes in the kitchen. Mrs. Carter was reading in the living room, the children were studying upstairs, and Mr. Carter was sitting up counting all the money he made off Negroes. I was sitting there thinking about old Lady Carter's tea cakes when I heard Mama's voice, "Essie Mae! Essie Mae!" Suddenly I remembered the knot on my head, and I jumped off the porch and ran toward her. She was now running up the hill with her hoe in one hand and straw hat in the other. Unlike the other farmhands who came up the hill dragging their hoes behind them, puffing and blowing, Mama usually ran all the way up the hill, laughing and singing. When I got within a few feet of her, I started crying and pointing to the big swollen wound on my forehead. She reached out for me. I could see she was feeling too good to beat George Lee, so I ran right past her and headed for Daddy, who was puffing up the hill with the rest of the field hands. I was still crying when he reached down and swept me up against his broad, sweaty chest. He didn't say anything about the wound, but I could tell he was angry, so I cried even harder. He waved goodnight to the others as they cut across the hill toward their shacks. As we approached the porch, Daddy spotted George Lee headed down the hill for home. "Come here, boy!" Daddy shouted, but George Lee kept walking. "Hey, boy! Didn't you hear me call you? If you don't get up that hill, I'll beat the daylights out of you." Trembling, George Lee slowly made his way back up the hill. "What happened to Essie Mae here? What happened?" Daddy demanded. She fell off of the porch and hit her head on the step," George Lee mumbled. "Where were you when she fell?" I was putting a diaper on Adeline. If anything else happened to one of these chaps, I'm going to try my best to kill you. Get yourself on home The next morning, George Lee didn't show up. Mama and Daddy waited for him a long time. "I wonder where in the hell could that damn boy be?" Daddy said once or twice, pacing the floor. It was well past daylight when they decided to go on to the field and leave Adeline and me at home alone. "I'm gonna leave y'all here by yourself, Essie Mae," said Mama. "If Adeline wake up crying, give her the bottle. I'll come back and see about y'all and see if George Lee's here." She left some beans on the table and told me to eat them when I was hungry. As soon as she and Daddy slammed the back door, I was hungry. I went in the kitchen and got the beans. Then I climbed into the rocking chair and began to eat them. I was some scared. Mama had never left us at home alone before. I hoped George Lee would come, even though I knew he would beat me. All of a sudden, George Lee walked in the front door. He stood there for a while, grinning and looking at me, without saying a word. I could tell what he had on his mind, and the beans began to shake in my hands. "Put them beans in that kitchen," he said, slapping me hard on the face. "I'm hungry," I cried with a mouthful of beans. He slapped me against the head again and took the beans and carried them into the kitchen. When he came back, he had the kitchen matches in his hand. "I'm going to burn you two crying fools up. Then I won't have to come here and keep your asses every day." As I looked at that stupid George Lee standing in the kitchen door with that funny grin on his face, I thought that he might really burn us up. He walked over to the wall near the fireplace and began setting fire to the bulging wallpaper. I started crying. I was so scared I was peeing all down my legs. George Lee laughed at me for peeing and put the fire out with his bare hands before it burned very much. Then he carried me and Adeline onto the porch and left us there. He went out in the yard to crack nuts and play. We were on the porch only a short time when I heard a lot of hollering coming from toward the field. The hollering and crying got louder and louder. I could hear Mama's voice over all the rest. It seemed like all the people in the field were running to our house. I ran to the edge of the porch to watch them top the hill. Daddy was leading the running crowd, and Mama was right behind him. "Lord have mercy! My children is in that house!" Mama was screaming. "Hurry, Diddley!" she cried to Daddy. I turned around and saw big clouds of smoke booming out of the front door and shouting out of cracks everywhere. "There! Esme's on the porch!" Mama said. "Hurry, Diddley! Get Adeline out of that house!" I looked back at Adeline. I couldn't hardly see her for the smoke. George Lee was standing in the yard like he didn't know what to do. As Mama them got closer, he ran into the house. My first thought was that he would be burned up. I'd often hoped he would get killed, but I guess I didn't really want him to die after all. I ran inside after him, but he came running out again, knocking me down as he passed and leaving me lying face down in the burning room. I jumped up quickly and scrambled out after him. He had the water bucket in his hands. I thought he was going to try to put out the fire. Instead, he placed the bucket on the edge of the porch and picked up Adeline in his arms. Moments later, Daddy was on the porch. He ran straight into the burning house with 3 other men right behind him. They opened the large wooden windows to let some of the smoke out and began ripping the paper from the walls before the wood caught on fire. Mama and 2 other women raked it into the fireplace with sticks, broom handles, and anything else available. Everyone was coughing because of all the smoke. Soon it was all over. Nothing had been lost but the paper on the wall, although some of the wood had burned slightly in places. Now that Daddy and Mama had put out the fire, they came onto the porch. George Lee still had Adeline in his arms, and I was standing with them on the steps. "Take Esme them out in that yard, George Lee," Daddy snapped. George Lee hurried out in the yard with Adeline on his hip, dragging me by the arm. Daddy and the farmers who came to help sat on the edge of the porch, taking in the fresh air and coughing. After they had talked for a while, the men and women wanted to help clean up the house, but Mama and Daddy refused any more help from them, and they soon left. We were playing, rather pretending to play, because I knew what was next, and so did George Lee. Before I could finish thinking it, Daddy called George Lee to the porch. "Come here, boy," he said. "What happened?" he asked angrily. George Lee stood before him, trembling. I went to the well to get a bucket of water, and when I come back, I seen the house on fire. Esme must have did it." As he stood there lying, he pointed to the bucket he had placed on the edge of the porch. That seemed proof enough for Daddy. He glanced at me for a few seconds that seemed like hours. I stood there crying. I didn't. I didn't. I didn't. But Daddy didn't believe me. He snatched me from the porch into the house. Inside, he looked for something to whip me with, but all the clothes had been taken off the nails of the walls and were piled up on the bed. It would have taken hours for him to find a belt. So he didn't even try. He felt his waist to discover he was wearing overalls. Nothing was in his reach. He was getting angrier by the second. He looked over at the wood stacked near the fireplace. Oh, my God, I thought. He's going to kill me. He searched through the wood for a small piece. There was not one to be found. Moving backward, he stumbled over a chair. As it hit the floor, a board fell out. He picked it up, and I began to cry. He threw me across his lap, pulled down my drawers, and beat me on my naked behind. The licks came hard, one after the other. Screaming, kicking, and yelling, all I could think of was George Lee. I would kill him myself after this, I thought. Daddy must have beaten me a good 10 minutes before Mama realized he had lost his senses and came to rescue me. I was burning like it was on fire back there when he finally let go of me. I tried to sit down once. It was impossible. It was hurting so bad, even standing was painful. An hour or so later, it was so knotty and swollen, I looked as if I had been stung by a hive of bees. This was the first time Daddy beat me, but I didn't speak to him or let him come near me as long as my behind was sore and hurting. Mama told me that he didn't mean to beat me that hard and that he wasn't angry at me for setting the fire. When I kept crying and telling her that George Lee started the fire, she told Daddy that she thought George Lee did it. He didn't say anything, but the next morning when George Lee came, he sent him back home. Mama stayed with us the rest of the week. Then, the following week, Mama's 12-year-old brother, Ed, came to keep us. A week or so after the fire, every little thing began to get on Daddy's nerves. Now, he was always yelling at me and snapping at Mama. The crop wasn't coming along as he had expected. Every evening when he came from the field, he was terribly depressed. He was running around the house, grumbling all the time. Shit! It was just a waste of time. Didn't get enough rain for nothing. We ain't gonna even get 2 bales of cotton this year. That corn ain't no good and them sweet potatoes just burning up in that hard-ass grass. God damn! I'd have did better on a job than this. Ain't gonna have nothing left when Mr. Carter take out his share. We had to hear this sermon almost every night, and he was always snapping at Mama like it was all her fault. During the harvest, Daddy's best friend, Bush, was killed. Bush was driving his wagon when his horses went wild, turning the wagon over in the big ditch alongside the road. It landed on his neck and broke it. His death made Daddy even sadder. The only times I saw him happy anymore were when he was on the floor rolling dice. He used to practice shooting them at home before every big game, and I would sit and watch him. He would even play with me then, and every time he won that money, he would bring me lots of candy or some kind of present. He was good with a pair of dice and used to win the money all the time. He and most of the other men gambled every Saturday night through Sunday morning. One weekend, he came home without a cent. He told Mama that he had lost every penny. He came home broke a few times more. Then, one Sunday morning before he got home, one of the women on the farm came by the house to tell Mama that he was spending his weekends with Florence, Bush's beautiful widow. I remember he and Mama had a real knockdown, drag-out session when he finally did come home. Mama fist-fought him like a man, but this didn't stop him from going by Florence's place. He even got bolder about it, and soon went as often as he liked. Florence was a mulatto, high yellow with straight black hair. She was the envy of all the women on the plantation. After Bush's death, They got very particular about where their men were going, and they watched Florence like a bunch of hawks. She couldn't even go outdoors without some woman peeping at her and reporting that she was now coming out of the house. Mama had never considered Florence or any of the other women a threat because she was so beautiful herself. She was slim, tall, and tawny-skinned, with high cheekbones and long, dark hair. She was by and far the liveliest woman on the plantation, and Daddy used to delight in her. When she played with me, she was just like a child herself. Daddy used to call her an overgrown wild child and tease her that she had too much Indian blood in her. Meantime, Mama had begun to get very fat. Her belly kept getting bigger and bigger. Soon, she acted as if she was fat and ugly. Every weekend, when she thought Daddy was with Florence, she didn't do a thing but cry. Then, one of those red-hot summer days, she sent me and Adeline to one of the neighbors nearest to us. We were there all day. I didn't like the people, so I was glad when we finally went home. When we returned, I discovered why Mama had gotten so fat. She called me to the bed and said, "Look what Santa sent you." I was upset. Santa never brought live dolls before. It was a little bald-headed boy. He was some small and looked as soft as one of our little pigs when it was born. "His name is Junior," Mama said. "He was named for your daddy." My daddy's name was Fred, so I didn't understand why she said the baby's name was Junior. Adeline was a year old and walking good. She cried like crazy at the sight of the little baby. While I stood by the bed looking at Mama, I realized her belly had gone down. I was glad of that. I had often wondered if Daddy was always gone because her belly had gotten so big. But that wasn't it, because after it went down, he was gone just as much as before, even more. Next thing I knew, we were being thrown into a wagon with all our things. I really didn't know what was going on, but I knew something was wrong because Mama and Daddy barely spoke to each other, and whenever they did exchange words, they snapped and cursed. Later in the night, when we arrived at my great-aunt Cindy's place, all of our things were taken from the wagon, and Daddy left. "Where is Daddy going?" I cried to Mama. "By his business," she answered. Aunt Cindy and all the children stood around the porch looking at him drive the wagon away. "That dog! That no-good dog!" I heard Mama mumble. I knew then that he was gone for good. "Ain't he gonna stay with us?" I asked. "No, he ain't gonna stay with us. Shut up!" She yelled at me with her eyes full of water. She cried all that night. We were allowed to stay with Aunt Cindy until Mama found a job. Aunt Cindy had 6 children of her own, all in a 4-room house. The house was so crowded, the 4 of us had to share a bed together. Adeline and I slept at the foot of the bed, and Mama and the baby at the head. Aunt Cindy had a mean husband, and our presence made him even meaner. He was always grumbling about us being there. "I ain't got enough food for my own chillin'," he was always saying. Mama would cry at night after he had said such things. Mama soon got a job working up the road from Aunt Cindy at the cook's house. Mrs. Cook didn't pay Mama much money at all, but she would give her the dinner leftovers to bring home for us at night. This was all we had to eat. Mama worked for the Cooks for only 2 weeks. Then she got a better job at a Negro cafe in town. She was making $12 a week, more than she had ever made. About a week after she got the new job, she got a place for us from the Cooks. Mrs. Cook let Mama have the house for $4 a month on the condition that Mama would continue to help her around the house on her off day from the cafe. The Cooks lived right on a long rock road that ran parallel to Highway 24, the major highway for Negroes and whites living between Woodville and Centerville, the nearest towns. To get to our house from the road, you entered a big wooden gate. A little dirt road ran from the gate through the Cooks' cattle pasture and continued past our house to a big cornfield. The Cooks planted the corn for their cattle, but often, when Mama didn't have enough money for food, she would sneak out at night and take enough to last us a week. Once, Mrs. Cook came out there and put up a scarecrow. She said that the crows were eating all the corn. When Mama came home from the cafe that evening and saw the scarecrow, she laughed like crazy. Then she started taking even more corn. She had a special way of stealing the corn that made it look just like the crows had taken it. She would knock down a few ears and leave them hanging on the stalks. Then she'd drop a few between the rows and pick on a few others. I don't remember everything she did, but before that season was over, Mrs. Cook had 3 more scarecrows standing. Right below the cornfield, at the base of the hill, was a swampy area with lots of trees. The trees were so thick that even during the day, the swamp was dark and mysterious looking. It looked like an entirely different world to us, but Mama never let us go near it because she said it was full of big snakes and people hunted down there, and we might get killed. Our little house had 2 rooms and a porch. The front room next to the porch was larger than the little boxed-in kitchen you could barely turn around in. Its furniture consisted of 2 small beds. Adeline and I slept in one, and Mama and Junior in the other. There was also a bench to sit on and a small tin heater. Our few clothes hung on a nail on the wall. In the kitchen, there was a wood stove with lots of wood stacked behind it, and a table. The only chair we had was a large rocking chair that was kept on the porch because there was no room in the house for it. We didn't have a toilet. Mama would carry us out in back of the house each night before we went to bed to empty us. Shortly after we moved in, I turned 5 years old and Mama started me at Mount Pleasant School. Now, I had to walk 4 miles each day up and down that long rock road. Mount Pleasant was a big white stone church, the biggest Baptist church in the area. The school was a little 1-room rotten wood building, located right next to it. There were about 15 of us who went there. We sat on big wooden benches just like the ones in the church, pulled up close to the heater. But we were cold all day. That little rotten building had big cracks in it, and the heater was just too small. Reverend Kaysen, the minister of the church, taught us in school. He was a tall yellow man with horn-rimmed glasses that sat on the edge of his big nose. He had the largest feet I had ever seen. He was so big he towered over us in the little classroom like a giant. In church, he preached loud, and in school, he talked loud. We would sit in class with his sounds ringing in our ears. I thought of putting cotton in my ears, but a boy had tried that, and the Reverend caught him and beat him 3 times that day with the big switch he kept behind his desk. I remember once he caught a boy lifting up a girl's dress with his foot. He called him up to his desk and whipped him in his hands with that big switch until the boy cried and peed all over himself. He never did whip me. I was so scared of him, I never did anything. I hardly ever opened my mouth. I don't even remember a word he said in class. I was too scared to listen to him. Instead, I sat there all day and looked out the window at the graveyard and counted the tombstones. One day, he caught me. "Moody gal, if you don't stop looking out that window, I'll make you go out in that graveyard and sit on the biggest tombstone out there all day." Nobody laughed because they were all as scared of him as I was. We used the toilets in back of the church. The boys' toilet was on one side and the girls' on the other. The day after Reverend Kaysen yelled at me, I asked to be excused. While
Sample complete. Ready to continue?